I'm Alan Poom, and today I'm going to talk about the role of technical assurance in oil and gas exploration. So here we have some policemen and cementers, and here we have Craig Revel Horwood. Now, if you're British, you know who this guy is. If you're not, I'll explain it later. So this post is inspired by this post by Stuart Gordon Archer, who's just coming up to retirement, and he's talking about his work in terms of assurance, which is what his latest role was. And he did quite a detailed post on LinkedIn, looking at the role of assurance. And this video is based in part on his work, plus also my own personal experience. So assurance, what and why? So what is assurance? It's the process by which the geological work that an evaluating hydrocarbon prospect is reviewed to try to ensure that it follows company procedures and has been done competently. The assumptions made are reasonable. Now, geologists make assumptions. Some of these may be okay, some of these may be a little bit out of, potentially out of line. So you need to look at it and see where they are. But you looked at all reasonable scenarios that you don't have tunnel vision, because quite often people can have a fixation with this is the answer, and they will try to do everything to confirm that answer rather than trying to looking outside the box or outside narrow confines. And that the evaluation is done in a consistent way across a company or an organization. Now, you can argue that consistency might be the enemy of innovation, but you need to have consistency in order to be able to do things in a way which is where you make a sound decision comparing apples with apples. And then the why. Now, management need to make the best decisions that they can, and they need to have confidence that the evaluations done by the geologists used to guide the decisions are fair and reasonable. Is the geologist going to get 100% right? No, because life is uncertain, nature is uncertain. But have they done a reasonable job? Have they looked at the potential risks and opportunities? Have they put everything together in a coherent and consistent way? A little bit about the different types of reviews that there are. First of all, you have peer assist. Now, this is a little less formal, perhaps an informal discussion between geologists working on a project and another fellow geologist. Look at the work that's been done. Have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? Yeah, this looks okay. This looks interesting. Maybe I can learn from that. So again, building a community of peers who understand each other, who trust each other, and moving things forward. Then you have an SME assist. This is a discussion with a subject matter expert, SME, to look at specific aspects of the geological evaluations. For example, looking at depth conversion, and I have a video on that on my channel if you're interested, looking whether that's been done in the right way, whether potential things that could be done differently, whether potential things that could be done extra. Maybe we could learn from you as well. Peer review is something a little bit more formal, looking at the geological evaluation, so that's documented and signed off. A functional review is a far more formal presentation where the evaluation is approved. Usually that's done as a decision point. I'll talk a little bit about decision points in a second. Then there's also reviews by JV partners, so at technical committee meetings, geologists will present their work to JV partners, assuming they are partners in the joint venture. It's not 100% owned by the same company. And the partners will comment and review. And I've been in NOJVs, I've been on both sides of the fence, both in non-operated joint ventures and as an operator, and it's very valuable because people will ask questions. Quite often the JV partners have done their own work themselves. So again, building a good relationship with your JV partners is pretty vital. And then there's external audits. So you have an external expert, generally done for reserve certification or resource certification, and the external expert produces something called the competent persons report. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. And that's far more formal. So decision making systems within oil and gas companies. So you generally have this chart, and all companies have something very similar. Sometimes they even bother changing the colors. But we're talking about here about these yellow diamonds. So these are decision points. So you have a decision point at the end of the create or explore phase. Do you have a potential prospect or do you have potential discovery? Then you have a decision point at the appraisal stage where you select whether the concept that's been selected is right. And you have firm project approval. Then just before first production operations, etc. So you would get different experts, not just geologists, but also engineers, drillers, production engineers, facilities engineers, all of these people. This will work together to prove that the plan has been done in a fair and reasonable way where all the relevant things have been considered. It's all done in the correct way. So this is when you tend to have functional reviews at these decision points at the yellow diamonds. This is again from Stuart. So he's got a very useful phrase here called cold-eyed but warm-hearted. So looking at things dispassionately, but understanding that the person doing it is a real human being. There are two ways of doing it. The easier way is mentoring. That's when you guide the geologists, you have a two-way conversations, both parties learn together. All very nice. But sometimes you have to resort to policing. So ensure that the work is done to company standards, uh, checking and dictating, and unfortunately this might become confrontational. You want to avoid getting to the confrontational stage, but sometimes that is necessary. So trying to put everything together is work like this. Framing. Again, this is very important because at the start of a project, you have a framing meeting to decide what needs to be done. So what decision do we need to make? What's the scope of the opportunity? What are the key risks and uncertainties? How does it fit in with the strategy and the budget and the time frame? So you get a realistic work plan agreed within a time frame where things need to be done, where things may come up, etc. And also you need to plan on managing the key stakeholders, both your internal stakeholders, the higher management who need to make the ultimate decision, and your external stakeholders, your joint venture partners and government and regulators. So timing and feedback. So timing, again, from Stuart. Early, steady, and often. So building a relationship of trust between the reviewer and the reviewed. Peer assist with open discussion and more questions than dogma, because you don't want to be in a situation of, our way or the wrong way, because the geologists are clever people and they'll come up with new ideas and you need to discuss them. Alternatively, you can do it late and hard. This is quite often a situation where you have a remote office where the relationships aren't there. We have a single final review between the decision with little preparation discussion. Now, that's not really a very good place to be. You want to get away from that because you want to talk frequently so everybody's on the same page. And you don't want to be in a confrontational place. That's generally a bad place to do. And feedback. Craig Revel Horwood. Do state the positive, frame the negatives as areas to improve with suggested solutions. Now, Craig is a judge on Strictly Come Dancing, the British version of Dancing with the Stars, and he can be a bit acerbic. He's an Australian guy, so let's hope your work is fabulous, one of his phrases, rather than a disaster, another one of his phrases. Then the hippos, highest paid person's opinion. This is a concept that Matthew Syed wrote about in his book. Some other person put it. Matthew didn't invent it, but he publicized it. And you get a situation where some characters tend to dominate the conversation, quite often higher management, etc. And dominant assurers might crowd out novel ideas. You don't want to be like Lancelot Spratt out of a British comedy film in the 1970s. So, Dr. Lancelot Spratt, this is the idea and this is how it needs to be done. The ideas need to be allowed to breathe and be tested. And if you've got a hippo, that can sometimes stop that. So if you are going to be a hippo, try to be this calm hippo rather than this aggressive hippo, because that really helps. So that allows people to talk, allows people to have their ideas, and then we can discuss them and test them. And you need to be aware of your own biases. Now, I have a video on my channel on biases. These are all the different biases that you'll have. And reviewers have biases as well as the geologists doing the work. And you need to try to look beyond that. That's not easy. It can be quite challenging. And then motivational alignment. Now, you need to try to eliminate, reduce the bad things, the arrogance, that we know best, complacency. Well, this is how it's always been. Or this area play is special, different. Well, it might be if you can explain it. Probably isn't. Then there's the motivation of preserving one's job, particularly if you're in a remote office and you want to talk up your prospects in order to get where you are. Or personal glory hunting. Again, that has been a problem. Or defensiveness, where somebody feels that they're being challenged as a person rather than their work being challenged. Again, a good assurance person can work through that, but it's not easy and can be emotionally draining. Whereas you've got good motivators. Now, when this happens, it's great. Curiosity, open-mindedness, when someone asks questions, professional pride, when they want to do a good job, learning from others. Well, if Pete or Sarah or Anita or Mukhtar did something interesting, well, God, I'm going to learn from him or her. Comparing with analogs. Well, this is works here, this is works there. Well, why is it the same? Why is it different? Asking what if and sharing ideas and knowledge. Obviously, we want to get to this place and we want to get as little of that as possible. Then you need to understand that there is a reducible uncertainty. Now, I've got videos on risking on my channel and you can have a look at those, but there's always going to be some uncertainty. And what you really want to do is get to these two horns. So either where you've got high confidence and high confidence that something is going to happen that's positive, or high confidence that something is negative so you don't bother. Save yourself a dry hole. Have you considered and tabulated all the reasonable uncertainties? Can we get to this kill or cure? Either here or here. We can't, well, we can't. We're going to have to live with it. Have we looked at reasonable alternative models? Now, sometimes people get fixated with model A, but what if model B happens? Or what if there's a model C? Is our range wide enough? Because nature has a habit of surprising us. And are we focusing on the right elements? Sometimes because something can be done more easily because it's the pet hobby horse of a geologist, people tend to concentrate on that and tend to forget about something else. Whereas the sealing rocks tend to be quite often a bit of a Cinderella. So people tend to focus either on the structure or the charge system or the reservoir. Again, I'll talk about petroleum risking in one of my videos on my channel. And then subjective probability. So this is a mug from the British Security Service, MI5, looking at what words mean. So you have your probability numbers here. So 1 is certain, 0 is impossible, 50 is equivocal, 50-50. So what does likely mean? Now that can mean something different in other people for different people, and particularly across cultures. So if you have a unified system of what these things are that everybody tends to understand and everybody tends to follow, that tends to help. And assurance can spread this. So whether you're going to do it as a dedicated team or community of peers, now I feel that you need both. You need a dedicated team because they're independent. They focus on assurance, they have wider perspective, and they're independent of the management, particularly local management. They can act as honest brokers. But if it's not well led, it can get a bit confrontational, can get dogmatic, and it may get prone to clique think. So you need to have a reasonably diverse team of people from different places, have had different experiences. And the leader of the team is a key person that makes things work. Now, in the company I used to work for, we used to have a guy called Mark Bond, who was an absolutely brilliant assurance team leader. Then you have a wider community of peers. So again, the company bringing people together, bringing in expertise from outside. Sometimes you may need to get an external consultant. Sometimes you need to get an internal person. And you look at preparing the next generation so people grow. May have to have specialist experts, experience in particular plays, but that again needs focusing and steering. And again, a good person can do that. You also have external technical audits. Now, as far as I know, there's no legal requirement for auditing hydrocarbon reserves in the way that you do financial audits for companies, for example, for listed companies. But quite a few people do it, and to reassure the investors that the reserves and resources really exist and the company is not exaggerating. There have been instances of fraud or misrepresentation, so that is to avoid that. Now, you get external consultants, D&M, ERCE, Writers Court, Gaffney Klein, etc., 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 etc. Apologies to anyone I haven't mentioned. Provide external audited technical work done by a company, and they presented something called the Competent Persons Report, which is given to the investors. Some governments also do reserves audit. So, for example, the Государственный комитет запасов in former Soviet countries, the State Reserves Commission, they will do a technical audit because the reserves go in the books of the nation. Now, these external interactions are always more challenging than internal reviews because, again, you don't know people. And in some countries and some cultures, they can get very confrontational. And that needs to be handled in the right way. So to sum up, technical assurance review are needed to ensure that evaluations that you use to make your decisions are as good as they can be. Are they ever going to be perfect? Of course not, because there's always going to be surprises. But if you look at as many things as you can get to close to base where you need to be. Several stages from peer assisted functional reviews, some are formal, some are less formal, but the key is to keep the process going. So continuous help and assessment to ensure the quality, ensure the decisions are made in the right way. And need of fairness and consistency as well as openness and flexibility. The key thing here is trust. Trust rather than confrontation gets the best result. Thank you very much. Please like, please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next.